Good day there. Welcome to our special day with Slick, a better you. My word, I got to check out the time though. Hey guys, welcome to another day with Slick, a better you. My name is Matt. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you guys have had a safe Thanksgiving and hopefully upcoming Christmas. That was Cosworth there. That's a part of my guest who I have coming on today, the animator who created him. Before I bring him aboard, I got a trailer for that particular movie. Let me get this. Come on now. Work with me here. Okay, here we go.
Breathtaking, thrilling, it has the feel of a classic. Disney's Beauty and the Beast is the most critically acclaimed movie of the year, and the one movie you won't want to miss. Beauty and the Beast, rated G. Now playing.
Connected to that movie. Let me get my boy here. There's a friend of mine here from Disney, another from the Disney canon, who I've had a pleasure of talking with beforehand, Mr. Will Finn himself. Hey, Will.
Hi there. Hi, Matt.
How you doing?
Well, thanks for having me.
No problem. Let me see. So I know we talked about this beforehand, but as you saw, got me Cosworth.
On model.
Yeah. And this is a sketch I did. I don't remember what grade I was in, but I know I was a lot young when I did this. This is let me see. Yeah.
That's great. I love it. I was a lot younger when I drew Comicsworth also. That's great. No, I love it.
Yeah. So I did that, and then I did, well, same sketch, but instead of kind of the female legs I just gave in that one, this is the actual one.
Oh, those legs. Oh, those legs. Yeah, they were tough. Actually, the middle section of him was a hotly contested design element of the character.
Right.
The time I got on until around November, October of whatever year it was. 90. And yeah, the original design, the top was great, the bottom was okay. The middle, I really hated, and I didn't find it conducive to animation. So a lot of arguing about that for a long time until I was ready to just say, I don't even want to do this. And then they said, over the weekend, see if you can come up with alternate versions that we like, because the other versions I've done, nobody else liked. The director said, if you come up with one that pleases us and one that pleases our art director, Brian McEntee, we'll go with that. And I did, and I was surprised myself because I went with something very simple, which was my objection to the middle of the original. It was much more complicated and didn't look solid.
Yeah.
It's so silly that I was for months. And I came up with a solution that everybody liked. And Roger Ehlers, who did story on the movie and later co-directed Lion King,
right,
he didn't like the middle of the original design either. And what I realized when I did, I was drawing something very similar to what he was doing in the story sketches because he didn't like it either. And I was so relieved that Roger was in my corner, but ultimately we all got on board. And then from that point on, it was smooth sailing. So fortunately, I had only animated, I think, one scene with the character. There was a lot of, at that point, there was a very long scene that I was on from about July to September.
Wow.
Scene in the middle of Be Our Guest where they're in the spotlight and he's trying to stop the beer steins from going, and then he's trying to stop some other characters and plates and all this. And then the spotlight hits him and there's a break, and Lumiere comes in and does does the break with him, and then he just has to react to Lumiere, and they create very animated Lumiere.
Right.
So there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of waiting. It's a very long scene. So fortunately, I had animated it with the original design that I didn't like, and then I was able to revamp it immediately afterward. And then the very next scene I did was the scene right after that, close up, and I used the new design. Everybody was happy with it. Yeah, and that was, say, smooth sailing from that point on.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I don't know if you know this or not, but in a way, I'm connected to the movie. I I was born the year it came out.
So was I.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well, happy 30th.
Thank you.
So not to, I guess we just spilled the beans anyway. So yeah, wow, it's amazing to have gotten this far from it.
Hmm.
It's 30 years on, and it feels. I always say when I go back through the past, if I think about it, it feels like a long time and a lot of stuff happened. If I just, but if I feel it, everything feels like yesterday.
Right.
The day I landed in Los Angeles feels like last week. Um, so I feel like the feelings are still very vivid and very palpable, but boy, a lot of time's gone by.
Well, you know what? I got a clip for you though. It's a clip of you talking about Cosworth.
Okay.
Let me see if I can grab it a hold.
This is Lumiere.
Enchanté, chérie.
If there's anything we can do to make your stay more comfortable.
It was kind of sketchy. There were several different versions of him in the storyboard. And when David Ogden Stiers got involved and started recording the voiceover, he sort of locked into this sort of John Houseman-ish characterization of this stuffed shirt, but with this frantic originality that he brought to it in all of his own.
Who said anything about the castle being enchanted? It was you, wasn't it?
Wow. Boy, what is that from?
That was from the making of the movie, and it came out in '93, I think.
Okay.
No, it came out in '92.
Was it on the video?
Say it again.
It was on the video.
They did. It was a separate video that y'all had for the progress that y'all played in New York. And there's at the beginning of the tape, they have the making of it. So it's actually on YouTube now, actually. But I have a copy of that.
Oh wow. Yeah, that was. Yeah. Now it not only feels like 30 years have gone by, but it looks like it too. What can I say about David Ogden Stiers is in the clip? It was just so brilliant. It made it so much fun to animate the character. I mean, he really was. He did really embody the character. And the thing, I kind of only knew him from MASH, and I think he was on his recurring character in the last season of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which I'd seen. And so I knew he was a character actor, and I liked him. I thought he was very good. I didn't see a lot of MASH.
Right.
Towards the point he got in, because I was in art school and I didn't have access to a TV, but I knew he was funny and I liked him. And when they picked him for the role, he was so great, and I got to go to a number of sessions and be in the room with him and banter with him a little bit. And the thing is, he had been in a improv troupe that were on TV a lot, I think called The Committee, and they were sort of like hit Second City types in the 60s and 70s, and he was the tall guy in their group.
Right.
And one of the things he played a lot of characters like Charles and like Cogsworth for that matter, but he really was like Jonathan Winters. He could pinball around in like every possible direction. He would do all sorts of asides and one-liners. He improv quite a bit in the show. That line that he says about what can I give her? And it was only a double. It was flowers, chocolates, ... And the directors, I remember I was in the room. The directors said, it feels like it needs a third, people we don't know.
Wow.
Anything. He looked down. He closed his eyes. And said, I got something. Everybody just burst out laughing. Promises you don't. And I thought, that we won't. It's too cynical. We won't put that in, but they did. And Mike Show, the wonderful Mike Show, great friend, animated that scene.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I wanted to tell you. I mean, when you was growing up, did you have an interest in getting into animation and what
I
have you?
never didn't have an interest in animation. And this is one of the things that, going through life, I've had to say I've been very lucky because um, I I always drew. Other members of my family drew. My mother drew. My grandmother painted. My older brother, who's a couple of years older than I am, Jim, he could draw. And there was always blank paper around the house for some reason, and everybody just would draw and sketch. And it was an environment in my family where it wasn't unusual for someone to pick up a pen or a crayon and draw something to make a point. So that became, and that just I didn't know people didn't draw. It took me a long time to figure out some people just don't.
Right.
And, then of course TV was big. Uh, I came into the world at the same time as Hanna-Barbera Studio was formed, but they were putting out stuff for syndication, and they had the Flintstones on prime time, which I dimly remember seeing. And of course, we loved all that stuff. Bullwinkle was on from Jay Ward, but the bulk of TV animation at that point was all the studios were recycling their old libraries of full animation shorts. The studios were terrified of TV; they wouldn't give them content, but they would license the old shorts. Popeye, Betty Boop. What else was on? Obviously, the Looney Tunes.
Right.
Tom and Jerry were on, Terry Tunes. And so all that fluid, kinetic animation was on all the time when I was a kid. And, all kids like to watch it, but it sort of caught me in a way. I really sort of caught the animation bug. Plus, Walt Disney was still on TV, he was still alive. And on his Sunday night show, The Wonderful World of Color, he would often introduce the show, and sometimes he would walk around the studio and introduce the animators and show them flipping the drawings. And around this time, I remember my father giving me a flip book of something, and I remember flipping it and just being fascinated by the fact that you could flip these little cards.
Right.
The effect of life, the illusion of life, as it were. And I was absolutely smitten with that. And then, sort of the last thing I remember, we had an encyclopedia in the house. Somehow my parents had shelled out for the World Book Encyclopedia of 1960. So this must have been around 1962. I don't even think I was in school yet.
Right.
Page in the encyclopedia about how they did animation.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister Barbara, who's about 10 years older than me, she said, "Hey, here's how they make the cartoons. You're interested in that?" And so, I jumped up onto the chair and looked at it with her. And there was a picture. It was a montage they composited from the Bob Thomas book, The Art of Animation, which was Disney's big book about animation that came out about 1959 in conjunction with Sleeping Beauty. And they'd made about a page spread of it. It showed the whole very condensed thing. It showed the whole thing of how it went from a story sketch to the animator, then to the layout, and then to the animator, and then recording the voices and all of that, and then finally the finished picture. And along the top of the page was John Lounsbury's animation, the owl from Sleeping Beauty, flapping its wings. And then in a few steps down, there was a picture of, I'm blanking now because I don't have the book anymore. It was either Milt Kahl drawing Kings from Sleeping Beauty, or was Mark Davis drawing Beauty and Prince Philip. And I saw them sitting at that chair and the big disc with the animation paper, and I just I was about 4 years old, and it had been brewing a long time, but that sort of cemented it. And it I'm gonna go do that.
Right.
And so that sustained me, and it's kind of like having a calling, which is a little bit grandiose because a real calling is like you're called to religion or you're called to become a doctor or an educator. Cartooning's all in all ultimately kind of a trivial thing, but it really was in that respect. And I just fixed on it, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was going to do it. I was going to get out to California. I grew up in mid-state New York, in a very rural area. And I was going to get out there someday, and I was going to learn how to do cartoons. And so that became a fixed thing. Yeah. And I'm very lucky to have that because it still sustains me. I still love to draw. I still love to work in animation, which I do.
Right.
And, it's given me a focus, almost to a fault. I'm almost too focused on it, but it's given me a focus that I realize not everybody has that, and it's difficult. I don't know how you go through life without it because I don't know who I'd be without that obsession with joining the ranks of the old animators.
Well, I gotta say, you, along with many of the guys who you work with over the years, played a big part in everybody's childhood, including mine. And without it, I don't think those films would have been the same. And I guess for you, it was a nice bridge because you was working at the studio where the 9 old men were when you did come, and then to watch them weekly, because I watched a few of Walt Disney's show. I got some of them episodes on DVD, and I'm always fascinated whenever I see them or him himself on talking about the making of the movies. So
it was funny because from him doing that, I realized in my own way as a very small kid was, he doesn't draw them, so he doesn't have any fun. So I wasn't interested so much in Walt. He didn't really. I mean, obviously, I admire Walt, and all I did
right
was read about him and everything. But I didn't want to run the place. I wanted to be one of the guys. It's interesting because I've spent more of my career doing story than animation, but I never wanted to be a story guy. I wanted to be an animator.
Right.
I managed to bounce in and out of the animator's chair over and over again until 2D went away, and then it was like, I can doing story now all the time. So yeah, it was interesting, but yeah, he was a presence, and interestingly, another character that I loved, the old cartoons were still on TV when it's very little, was Woody Woodpecker, and there was a syndicated show that came on in the afternoons, and Walter Lantz would sometimes do the same thing.
Right.
And it's interesting because Lantz was a rival, but Disney always liked him. I don't know if you know the story about Lantz and Disney, but of all of his rivals, Walt was smiled most fondly on Walter Lantz.
Right.
Because I don't know if you know the story about Oswald. When Walt came up with his second character, Oswald, Universal said, hired all his artists away and said, "Oh, by the way, you don't own your character, so
right
away, and we're going to do the series without you." Walt was devastated and went on to create Mickey Mouse, which obviously went on and on and on. But then a few years later, Lantz hired everybody away and somehow finagled the rights to Oswald too. Walt loved that, and he was always fond of Lantz after that.
Yeah, that always fascinated me about how he had somebody else in mind prior to Mickey. I know Mickey got the ball rolling, but yeah, I know a lot about Oswald.
Oswald's a great character, particularly in the Disney cartoons. Not so much in the Lantz cartoons, but the Disney cartoons a lot of them are very good, silent cartoons, and obviously lots of
right.
And there was a book. It was called Walt in Wonderland. I think it was not written in English, but it was translated into English. I don't have it anymore. It was a great book about everything Walt Disney did up to the point of making Mickey Mouse. And it was the Alice in Cartoonland series, the silent series with the live little girl and the cartoon environment, and Oswald. And it's always interesting because you meet a lot of people who are inspired by the Disney story, and they all want to be Walt Disney in 1954 when he's opening Disneyland and has successful thriving studio. Nobody wants to be Walt Disney in the mid-20s when he spends 8 years making cartoons and nobody barely noticed. Beaten out by Terry Toombs and Max Fleischer and all that. Nobody wants to be that Walt Disney, but that's close to 8 years before Mickey Mouse. And that's the real story of how you get anywhere. I was in the business for 10 years before I started my stride. And, I'd read that in books about animation. It takes about 10 years to become an animator. But, I'll get it right out of the gate. But I didn't. It took me
Yeah.
10 years, and you know, you never stop learning new things doing it. So I guess what I'm saying is, there's a long period where you have to put up with yourself. Chuck Jones used to say you've got 10,000 bad drawings in you. So start getting them out of your system now.
Wow.
Because it takes a long time. One of the things I realized over time was that we live in a world where we see finished products all the time, so we don't have to see what it takes. I mean, even to make a meal. So you get very impatient with yourself and with the world when you're not getting the result you want. But the thing I've learned time and time again, particularly about this business, is very few things come out perfect on the first try. It's a lot of trial and error in every aspect.
Right. Did you, well, growing up, did you, I've asked everybody this question. Did you have a favorite Disney film?
Yeah, The Jungle Book was, so that was, I mentioned seeing all that stuff when I was around 3, 4 years old, and just pretty much making my mind up about wanting to be a cartoonist. And then when in 1967, they used to do a Christmas show. Every year they didn't have an animated feature every year, but every year they had one, which is like every 3 or 4 years.
Right.
They would do a Christmas show on Disney called From All of Us to All of You, and it was an hour-long compilation of Christmassy scenes from Disney movies, and then it would end with them introducing new scenes from their upcoming show, and that was The Jungle Book. I remember just seeing that on an old black and white TV, on a not particularly big screen, just Baloo and King Louie and Shere Khan and Kaa and Bagheera and all those characters, and I just lit up, and that was just like, okay, now I don't just want to be a cartoonist. I don't just want to be an animator. I want to be a Disney animator.
Right.
My mind is, really fixated on that. Even though, I was shocked to learn Disney diehards who were a little bit older than me didn't think much of Jungle Book. And I have to say that most of the stuff they did after Jungle Book, Aristocats, and Robin Hood, and things like that, they weren't they were not particularly great either. But I went to go see all of them. I was always like taking notes.
Right.
Oddly enough, the animators, who of course were the people I identified with, were doing some of their best work on those pictures, even if they were considered less classic. So that's what I took away when I watched them. Is the animation was so expert, and so they had so perfected their skills, and they were so good at. They were so one of the things that Jungle Book I liked about it. I was 9, and the other big Jungle Book fan in my circle is Andres Deja, and we've always
Right.
Scar and Jafar and Gaston, and Andres and I always used to argue about who loved Jungle Book more. I think it's a draw, pun intended. But so yeah, what I liked about the animation from that era, particularly in Jungle Book, because the animals are semi-anthropomorphic, but they're concentrically anthropomorphic. So
Right.
reminds you of a man. Baloo reminds you of a man who reminds you of a bear, who reminds you of a man, who reminds you of a bear. It was just seamless, and the things they did with the snake, shrugging shoulders he doesn't have,
Mm-hmm.
tying him into knots and things like that. It was, and I don't want to say it was easy, but they made it look so easy at that point.
Oh yeah, yeah, most definitely. And it's weird because I love Jungle Book as well, and it's like to me it felt like it was so, like you said, well put together. They had all the Sterling Holloway, George Sanders,
Yeah.
Phil Harris, so many people that's known then that was in that movie, and I always found it weird that, of course, that was Walt's last film before he passed away that he worked on, but it's like his fingerprints was on there, even though it came out after a year after he had passed. But it was just yeah.
No, it really was more so than even some of the recent pictures because, in the 50s, as Disney World, Disneyland got underway and at Disney World, and he was working on I think it was the 1962 World's Fair, building a lot of attractions for that. So his mind was elsewhere, which is probably why Sleeping Beauty is, it's a spectacular looking movie, but, it wasn't a big hit.
Right.
It's not the best story. It's not the most fun one to watch, but he wasn't as involved. And I remember he had sort of charged, and of course Sleeping Beauty cost a fortune, so there was a huge backfire. They'd had that book, The Art of Animation, come out. And the last part of it was how to submit your portfolio and become an animator. But then the movie bombed, and they stopped hiring, and they decimated the animation division in Burbank, and people were laid off left and right. And so the business shrank, and not just at Disney, but the business was shrinking. I mean, this is the irony of being a little kid in short pants, falling in love with all this beautiful things. And then as I'm growing up saying, I'm going to go out there and do this, the industry was actually collapsing. So that by the time I got out to LA, it was on life support. I mean,
Right.
It was a shadow of itself, and there are a few people hiring. But the last thing I want to say about that is that Walt had signed on. He liked the book. He got the rights to the book, 101 Dalmatians. He loved the script that Bill Peet wrote. And he more or less signed off on the script, and he didn't weigh in on the movie very much, except to complain that he didn't like the art direction, which sent a lot of people to convention crazy.
Right.
Mitigate the art direction because of that, or not mitigate it, he had to alter it to be a little bit less graphic, which I don't think would have made a difference to the audience. And then the picture was a big hit.
Right.
And, from now, obviously, I wasn't there; I was still a little kid. But from the impression I got talking to people who were there, Walt was like, "Well, I guess these guys know what they're doing now. I'll get busy with Disney World." And he dug up Sword in the Stone. It's a whole interesting bit in itself, and he let them make the movie without any interference. And I know Frank Thomas, one of the few times I got to talk to him, said that was his favorite film to work on because they didn't have to do. There was no Walt breathing down their necks, and they got to just have fun, and they loved it. The animators did have fun, and you can have fun, and you can tell they had fun when you watch it. It's just the story doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. So when the picture came out, Walt was very unhappy with it, and he said, "Well, maybe I've given you guys too much free reign. I'm going to get back involved on Jungle Book," which was Bill Peet, who was the superstar story man from the 40s on. He was heading up Jungle Book, and he had already intended to take it in his own direction and wanted to be very Kipling-esque, and Walt didn't want to do any of that. But that led to Bill Peet quitting the studio after decades of stellar service there. Just in a snit, he just quit. Didn't come back. So Walt turned the story over to Ken Anderson, who was more. Again, this is all stuff I've heard third hand, but he was more on board with doing what Walt wanted. So
right.
Walt said it. Now I know Vance Gary, who worked on the movie, it was maybe his second or third movie. Vance was I got to work with Vance at Disney decades later, and he was a good friend and just a fabulous person and so humble. You couldn't give him a compliment. You couldn't pay him to take one. He was just like. I don't think I don't think animation was his first thing he wanted to get into, but he wound up doing it. He did it for life.
Right.
But Vance said he hated working on Jungle Book. He'd always say, "You wouldn't love that movie if you've been stuck working on it."
Oh wow!
And I saw another quote in an interview from him where he said, "I just never figured out where it was," because Walt would spitball all this stuff, and then they'd have to figure out how to make it work. And he was very intuitive about constructing a story. And the story the way he approached the story, the Jungle Book, is very slight. And of course, he didn't follow the book. He only followed, aspects of the book. In fact, he told Larry Clemens, when Larry Clemens came out to write it, he said, "This is allegedly the story is." He said this. He gave him the copy of the Rudyard Kipling book. "This is Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book."
Right.
And so, and I love that Walt. And it's a shame he died. So because he was turning into a much more irreverent, freewheeling Walt, and I think they tried to do that with the following pictures, but his taste was so sharp. I mean, he came up with Phil Harris as the bear and George Sanders and all of that. He he knew what to cut out of the movie because he was still making cuts to it right after his last day in the studio. And he knew what to leave in, and it does have his fingerprints all over it. And it's not only irreverent to Kipling, it's irreverent to Disney, because the whole climax of the Snow White movie in 1950, 30 years earlier, was getting the audience to cry over the fact they thought she was dead. George crying. And then there's a similar scene in Jungle Book where you think Baloo is dead, and it's played for laughs because he's listening and he's saying, "Oh, I wish my mother could have heard this." And it's the Snow White scene, but played for laughs. And I think that somebody could go that far in that span of time is amazing, and you have to wonder what he would have done.
Right.
But nobody, everybody was always trying to second guess Walt Disney. Couldn't do it. That one made a big impression on me from that point on.
Yeah, Walt was he was one heck of a guy, from the animated films, live action films. I'm a fan of Mary Poppins, and
oh yeah,
I love that movie. Him doing that and the parks and what have you, and even prior to his passing, he just had so much work that he was, who knows what would have went on and happened if he was still around today, because he just had so much that he was going to go from not having much starting to just,
yeah, there, but for tobacco. His crown is smoking, but I always say that Disney is too easily revered and he's too easily demonized. And I remember there was a review in the LA Times when Neil Gabler's biography on Walt came out, and it was a great drawing because they had a drawing over a graphic, and it was Walt Disney drawn in very almost like a woodcut style, and one half of his face was angelic and the other half was a devil. And I think that Gabler tried to make that point that Disney was he has a reputation for being a choir boy and doing wholesome.
Right.
But there's always little hints of antics, subversion in there too. You can call this conservatism. A fascinating person, one of a kind. They don't come along. They don't grow those people like that on trees. And there's a lot of myths about him. And obviously I never met him, so I don't know what he was actually like. But he's very easy to demonize. He's very easy to make holier than thou too. And I like to think there was a real person there. I think that person was pretty mercurial and hard to predict, and something of a grump a lot of the time. But really, given that he didn't really have any formal education, I think his sense of what would entertain an audience. I mean, even going all the way back to Snow White, he cut a lot out of that picture too. And when you see the stuff he cut out, God, anybody else would have killed that. He got something this good in the movie.
Right.
And he just like, no, we're cutting this out. It's slowing down the film, and we don't have time. He was also very pragmatic too. He had to make a lot of cuts in Bambi, just even in production techniques, just to get it done. So, that's a very admirable balance to strike, and not easy.
Anything to say about his nephew, Roy Disney?
Oh, Roy was wonderful. He was great to me, and he looked and sounded like Walt.
A lot of people said that.
And it was amazing to come around the corner of the hall and see him walking the opposite direction and have him say, "I will." It's like that. Just Roy Disney knows my name. He was very good to me, and a wonderful person, and in a lot of respects, the person who stopped them from killing animation in the mid '80s, which I think they would have if they could have. He was, instrumental in that, and he was very easy to talk to, and he he carried the torch. I remember him making notes in some of the, we would screen the movies on 3/4 video, rough cuts, and you'd sit there with Katzenberg and Roy, and the discussions among the animators about what needed to be done and stuff that hadn't been animated yet, and critique on the animation that was done, and he would always have great things to say. Yeah, and really protecting the whole Disney sensibility, which obviously is innate.
Yeah.
But he was wonderful, and
So anything to add about work film that you worked on prior before coming to Disney? I know one film you.
I didn't work on anything prior to coming to Disney. I was
Okay.
out of art school. This is a. I'll try to condense this, but so the fascinating things, like I said, is all these people in my generation grew up, loving animation, loving fluid animation, and then right around the time we were born, the TV industry took it over, and this stuff sat on screen side by side, so it was all cartoony. Just it's okay, fine. Some
Right.
places do limited, some places do unlimited. Well, it wasn't true. The places that did do full animation were folding up, and Disney ultimately turned out to be the last one. And in the 70s, they decided they would train people, young people, to do it, which is something that wasn't a given back then. In the 30s, and there was a lot of training and mentorship that went on in animation, bringing people in and teaching them how to do it. That's where all the nine old men came from.
Right.
But then you get to the late 40s, and people in the industry could see again, this is my own theory, but they could see the handwriting on the wall. Television was coming in, the theatrical shorts were starting to die out, and they were going to lose their seats, they were going to lose their offices and desks and chairs. So they kind of closed ranks, and they didn't train people that much. There was a lot of training during Sleeping Beauty during the mid 50s, but then when that film tanked, and like I said, they just decimated the vision there at Disney, and a lot of those people went to television, went to Hanna-Barbera and Patty Freeling, Filmation, places like that. But the old guys had not really been willing to train people because they were afraid of losing their jobs. I can say that if you look at the credits from any cartoon from the late 40s, it's the same people in the mid 80s. So, they didn't really, they gradually a few young people started, dribbling into each other, but not flooding. So in the 70s, somebody decided, we do have to keep this going. I think in the Ron Miller division, maybe Ron himself decided we do have to keep this going somehow. And in the 60s, Wooly Reitherman was charged with how do we do it on a budget. Walt realized after Sleeping Beauty, we can't do this. We can't
Right.
5 years and untold money. We have to do these things in a lighter vein and get them out faster. So Wooly was charged with doing that and had gotten that to happen in some respects. And he and John Lounsbury were charged with training young people, and they started training people on the Winnie the Pooh films and Pete's Dragon and things like that. Rescuers had Ron Clemens, who co-directed Little Mermaid and all that with John Lounsbury. He worked on. And so, but then Lounsbury died suddenly, another chronic smoker, and Eric Larson, who was still at the studio doing various things, took his place as the mentor,
Right,
for young artists, and he also canvassed the country. I'll get to the points. He canvassed the country looking for talent, and in 1978 he came to Pittsburgh, where I was going to school. I went to Pittsburgh, which is a pay-for-play commercial art school. Not really there was no Cal Arts, let's just put it that way. And I had no hope of getting Cal Arts. I didn't have the grades, I didn't have the money, I didn't have any grade.
right.
So I wound up through connections of an art teacher I had in high school, going to Artists in Pittsburgh and getting general commercial art training there. They said they had an animation department. They didn't. but they did manage to get, when Eric Larson swept through Pittsburgh, he spent the morning at Carnegie Mellon, which is like an A-list art with a capital A school. And
Right.
then, at 11 o'clock, he was going to come to our school, and they had people sign up for who'd like to talk to the training, to the guy who's in charge of hiring at Disney. And one other person signed up, just me, another person. And I got her out of the way in like 20 minutes. She was done. I was like, okay, go. And then I didn't get her out of the way. But she talked to him for about 20 minutes, showed the portfolio, and he's very nice, and moved on. And then for the next 4 hours, I sort of attached myself to Eric's shoulder like a barnacle. You know, we took him to lunch, and I was just babbling away about Disney and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and it's just like, you know, I was so excited to meet this guy. He had animated Figaro and Pinocchio. He'd animated some of Peg and Lady the Tramp. He was just, you know, he was legendary, you know. Just, directed some of Sleeping Beauty. Just really a legend. And it was funny. There was a book out on the Raggedy Ann movie at the time by John Haymaker. A book about the making of the Raggedy Ann movie, which was a Richard Williams movie, which I've never sat through. But it was a really good book, and a lot of people in there were people like John Silvestri and Eric Goldberg, who I got to know later. It was made in New York, a lot of it. But they had a picture of Frank, Ollie, and Eric in the back of the book. So I said, I got to find a picture of this guy. There's no pictures, no images. Let's say Eric Larson, and there's a picture of him. I turned to the page, and there's a picture of them standing in front of the animation building, and Frank was on the left, you know, standing there, and Ollie was on the right, and Eric was going like this. It's at the top of his head. He's just like, you know,
wow.
12 pictures. That's the one they put in the book. So it's like, I still didn't know what this guy looked like. So I met him, and obviously you could find him online now. And he's just wonderful grandfatherly figure with a very patient demeanor and a deep rumbling voice that seemed to come up from somewhere beneath the crust of the earth. And but very, very patient, very kind of. At the end of the interview, I showed him my portfolio, and I'd been, you know, like I said, I'd just been bothering him all day. And he looks at my portfolio, and he didn't think much of it. I'm about 5 months from graduating. This is May of '78. And I said, well, what do you think? And he said, well, I can tell you from what I see in your portfolio, this would not get you hired into our training. But having spent half the day with you and listening to you and seeing your enthusiasm for it, sometimes that's enough to get someone started. So I encourage you to finish your training here. Send me your portfolio in whenever you graduate. I'll look at it. Send it directly to me. Don't send it to review board. Send it to me. I'll look at it, and then I'll let you know. But whatever you do, plan, if you really mean this, plan on getting out to LA and getting work anywhere. And I'll be someone who, you know, keep me apprised of your progress. Don't hesitate to call me. He gave me his card. And so what I always like to say is he gave me exactly as much encouragement as I deserved, and just enough to keep me going. He didn't say, you know, you're a slam dunk, and he didn't say you're hopeless. Right? He said, come out and contact me, and so I did. Yeah, I sent my portfolio in September. He wrote back, said, "Nah, you're still not there, but you know, I repeat, get out here. Here's my new phone number. Call me at the studio, and come over to the studio and show me what you're doing. And we can talk." As I go, so I did manage to get a ride shared with somebody who was going to come out here and live with a relative, Jane Gabriel, trek across the country, pickup truck, and I called Eric as soon as I got settled. I was staying with a friend of a friend of a friend. And I called him. He said, "Sure, why don't you come out on November 1st? It's my birthday." And so then it was middle October. So about 2 weeks later, I get over to the We continued to do that through April when I finally got hired. Mostly by Eric's business. So that's how I got into the business at 20. And started in the old animation building. Spent my first 8 months in the business as a trainee on Fox Now. very vivid experience. Talk about vivid. To be in the hallowed halls of the original Disney animation building. Wow. But I got fired. I was caught in the crossfire. There was a big. I didn't realize that there were factions inside the studio, and there was a big faction between the Don Bluth unit, which wanted to break away, ultimately make their own films, which they did. And Don's approach, I'll just say, was to be a lot more traditional Disney and a lot more based in Disney on things that had already been done. And at least that's my take on it. And there were a lot of young people coming out of CalArts who were getting hired who wanted to go off in a different direction and not be so
Right.
precious with servicing Disney legacy, but still, doing fun stuff. And those people included, obviously John Lasseter and Brad Bird, and Tim Burton, and John Musker, and people. And I'm probably forgetting people, but some of the Brad Bird and John Lasseter had left the studio right before I got there. But I got there right in the middle of this big battle. So I got there in April, and then the Bluth guys all quit in September. And I thought I was going with them. I was really excited about what they were talking about doing. I sort of fallen into bad graces with the other group, largely through fault of my own. And then they were gone, and they didn't really want to hire me. So I had to basically just. Then I got fired in November. And
Right.
I had to beg my way onto the crew, which I did, and gradually worked my way into the Bluth crew as a story guy. I wanted to be an animator, but they let me animate. He really saw me as a story guy, and that's how I used me. And I wasn't storyboarding. I would sometimes draw like little sketches of ideas, but mostly I was writing. I was writing like scripting.
Right.
And so I was writing dialogue for Dom DeLuise and some of the stuff with the rats. I didn't write all of it, but he would give me a sense of the scene that he wanted, and then I was asked to write it, and he would usually polish it. And then if he wrote something, he would ask me to look at it and my suggestions. I got to go to all the recording sessions, which was phenomenal. 21 years old, sitting in the room with Dom DeLuise, and all these great actors.
Yeah, there's a clip of I don't have it, but on here, but it's a clip of you on YouTube, the making of the Secret of Nim, and you working with what's his name, the voice of the bird, Don.
Dom DeLuise, yeah. It's just so funny because you're so young. Dom DeLuise was everywhere. How would you not know Dom DeLuise's name?
Hey man.
But no. I know there was I think an Italian film crew that came out to film this, and at one point I didn't know this. They focused the camera on me, and I'm like sitting there scratching like dandruff out of my side.
Oh Lord.
For like 30 minutes, it seemed like just this endless block-wide shot of my face scratching my skin. It couldn't have been more disgusting. And when we saw the film somehow, even though it wasn't for U.S. consumption. He says he scratched his head again. But it was, yeah, it was such a vivid experience. And, we were all excited and we were all sure we were going to change the world. And Secret Moon was going to be the Star Wars of animation.
Right.
It wasn't. And so it was kind of disappointing after that. And we got to do the video games in the years after that. But after the video games sort of figured out, I moved on and went into TV and freelancing and just, and oddly enough, a few months later, they got to do Bluth landed American Tail, and which I always think is one of his best movies. And I was invited to go back, but I didn't.
Right.
I felt like I'd done my tour of duty, and I'd certainly gotten a lot of great training directly from Don, and certainly from John Pomeroy, was very generous with his time. Linda Miller, who I shared an office with, we're still friends.
Mm-hmm.
A wonderful, talent Linda had sort of taken me under her wing at Disney when I was a trainee, and that's why when they left, I sort of didn't really have a whole lot of lifeboats to jump into. But Linda was a really a good friend right out of the gate. And the thing about Linda was that she was a phenomenal cartoonist, really almost a savant. I've never seen anybody draw that easily. I don't want to make it sound like too because people don't like it, but she really was one of, you know, I'm not a natural. I didn't have a lot of natural talent. I even understood this as a kid because my brother could draw better than I. So I was basically copying him. And, I always said that, I don't really have a ton of talent, but I'll have to make up for it with skill. Talent is what I see as what is innate.
Right.
Whatever is innate is what you can call talent. Everything else, what you learn through sweat or other endeavors, is skill. And obviously, we all wish we were blessed with genius talent, but most people go the combination route. Linda was like just talent. It just was pure talent. And still is, and just an amazing person to work with. That's another thing I'll say about Uploop, even at Disney in the 70s. Even though there was this sort of conflict that came about from his approach, he did bring a lot of. He wasn't the only one, but he brought a lot of women into animation at animators' tables, not inkers and painters.
Right.
Mike Linda, Emily Giuliano, Heidi Goodell, Vera Law, who just passed away, rest in peace, and Lorna Cook Pomeroy. She was married to John at the time. Lorna Joan Pomeroy Cook. Very talented women animators, and they, all of those people who I just listed went to the Blue Studio and stayed there, and it was. That was, I don't even know whether that was deliberate or how that came about, but in the prior decades, they wouldn't give women jobs in the animation department. They could be in the
Right.
department, but very rarely did a woman get hired to animate. And some people said that was because, having worked in the co-ed studio on Hyperion, in Silver Lake, that there was too much skirt chasing, so that's why.
Wow.
And I've even heard a few stories that, like, wow, those guys were out of control. Maybe that had something to do with it, but it was great when that barrier was broken in my generation. It's just something we're used to.
Right. Well, I got another clip for you of you for you talking. The look you just gave me. It's another character you designed that I was a fan of, and might get a kick out of it. Let me see here.
The inspiration for Iago came from the pet cockatoo that my wife and I had. Our bird alternates between very docile and very quiet to very loud and raucous.
We're never gonna get a hold of that stupid lamp. Just forget it. Look at this. Look at this. I'm so ticked off that I'm molting.
He's the only parrot with a full set of choppers in his mouth. Because you can't have Gilbert Gottfried's voice coming out and not see those big teeth.
To me, Gilbert is doing a takeoff on like a classic Borscht Belt style comedian.
What if you were the chump husband?
But he's sort of put a spin on it where he's sort of like a mental patient who thinks he's a Borscht Belt comedian because he just goes completely off the deep end with his ranting and raving.
Wow. I do remember that interview. I do remember. God Aladdin was so much fun.
Yeah.
I guess not for everybody. Some of the people I talked to said, "What?" But that was so much fun. And I mean, the thing with Beauty was I loved working on the Cogsworth character. I didn't know what to think of the film. The film was
Really
very rough, and when I was finished, I was wrapped up in around July, August, from 91. And then I jumped on to Aladdin. And again, I had it to start with a very long scene. And but then when I saw the picture finished, when it came out, I was just in love with Beauty and the Beast. I was so happy and so proud. And it was a huge hit, huge.
Right.
And that was just so satisfying. And I was already working on Aladdin. And the Gilbert thing is amazing because some of the higher ups in management didn't want him. They thought he was too harsh. And I just loved Gilbert. And it's a story I've probably told this before elsewhere, but I almost sank myself from getting that job because during about halfway through Beauty and the Beast, I read the script for Aladdin and I saw the parrot character. I loved it. But he wasn't like he was in the movie. He was more like Lord Grimsby, which is a character I animated, Little Mermaid. And he was sort of John Gielgud again, a little bit like Cogsworth. And the thing was that they wrote Jafar as being out of control and losing his temper all the time. And the bird gets it, calm yourself, Jafar, I have a plan. Sort of like whispering in his ear. Sort of like the real Iago, sort of like. So then when they screened the rough reels, Katzenberg saw it and said, "You got to switch that because the villain's a maniac and he's always losing his temper. That's weak. Make the bird crazy." But Gilbert was hotly debated because he does come on very hard. But the funny thing that happened was Eric Goldberg comes to the studio. I'm still on Beauty.
Right.
He said, "Guys, I'd really love to do this character." And I made some drawings. They said, "Okay, we'll definitely put you in first position." But I meet Eric Goldberg, and I just worshipped Eric. I've seen all of his work from London, his commercial work and work with things and people like that. And I was just in awe of him. I meet him, and he's just this great guy and a good friend. And he asked me if I'd like to work on the genie. And I said, "God, Eric, I would do anything to be like on your crew. There's only one problem. As I can say this now publicly. I cannot stand Robin Williams. I think it's brilliant to cast him, and I think what you're doing with the animation already and the test scenes, I think it's perfect.
Right.
The world loves Robin Williams, but he's a whistle I just don't hear. I cannot stand that kind of comedy. And so Eric was very understanding. I said, "Fine, And then at that point was when they wanted to cast Gilbert, and when he was the front runner, and Eric had told the directors, he'd mentioned, I know Will wants to do this character, but I don't think he's going to like Gilbert Gottfried. So if he doesn't like Robert Williams, he's sure as heck not going to like Gilbert Gottfried. But for whatever strange, I was a fan of Gilbert from the first time I'd seen him. So I did and do really enjoy him. And so I managed to get to John and Ron just in time before they scratched me off the list. And I got to do it, and I got to meet Gilbert and know him. But it was. But he got sick. He got really sick. He'd done an audition. What you hear in the movie is actually from his audition tape when he says, "Oh, there's a big surprise. I think I'm going to have a heart attack and die from not surprised." And, he had done that line, and we were all starting to get to do little pieces of test animation. So I roughed out something to that, and they were playing the different characters with the different voices. And executives were looking at it in the conference room, and they were making the notes. Okay, get to Iago. I think he was from the last, and only things that I'm really on the fence about this guy. I did this voice. I don't.
Yeah.
But 10 other people have been cast. And they played my animation with it, and the whole room burst into laughter. Well, I guess. I guess it'll be them. And I was so gratified by that. Obviously, Gilbert was getting the laughs. Helped.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first scene animated. It was a long scene, and they kept rewriting the ending because the hint that Jafar got, the diamond in the rough, kept changing.
Mm-hmm.
The hint that the tiger had left was always changing, so they kept changing. So the beauty of it is I got to animate that. So it was like 30 feet or something like that, and it goes on for and I animated it, and the drawings were so rough.
Right.
When we came back from the break of the holidays, I looked and said, I can't send this to you. And so at that point, Eric was really just on fire. Eric Goldberg was really on fire with the character design style. So I looked at my model and I revamped it a little bit and pushed it, and then redrew every frame of that animation.
Right.
And but it only took like a week because it was all done. It just needed to look nice. The other thing that because Andreas had to wait to do Jafar because they kept changing his dialogue. The great thing is I've co-animated a lot. I obviously co-animated a lot with Nick, doing the candlestick, and Dave doing the teapot and Beauty and the Beast. I was doing the character Lord Grimsby, whose character nobody remembers, but I love him. He's sort of a trusty old mentor for Eric. I did a lot of Eric stuff. Eric in particular was tough because they had rotoscope, and I would usually get to the scenes faster because I was not as high up on the food chain. So they would say just animate to the roto and the layout.
Right.
Go to the animators who were doing Eric. Well, the animators doing Eric would always throw out the roto to be animated, so I would get it back and have to redo what I did. So co-animating is always great, but it can be a problem. I never had to do that with Jafar. If I got the scene first, I would go to Andreas and he'd draw a line. This is where his shoulders are going to be, and then just do what you're going to do, and I'll stick to that.
Yeah.
Every time. And then if I said whatever you're doing in the scene, do it, and I'll make sure his feet are on his shoulders. And we always did it like that. There's a lot of
Yeah, and I gotta say, Gilbert was, to me, the best choice that was selected to do the voice of Iago. I mean, I confess, I didn't know a lot of his work, but I know he was in Problem Child and did a few other movies. But him just doing the Iago, I mean, he just took that character to like a whole another level. And in fact, I even got this right here. I don't know when the last time you seen this
Watching
here,
the master, exactly. Yes, he just would go on, and then he'd say, "Get out of the room! You're bothering me. Call security. I'm going to take away his crayons. He's irritating." Because you don't want to be bothered. Who needs it? Who needs it? You got enough grief in your life. Who needs it? Thanks again.
Yeah. Boy, am I glad that idiot's gone.
Yeah, he was. That was a good choice y'all did picking him to do that voice. Just so many of them. Took off with that, and
they did try a lot of other people because there was a certain amount of opposition to Gilbert initially. And I remember they played them in the screening room against picture. Story sketch. There was no animation yet, but they would play them against picture, and some of them were perfectly good actors, but nobody popped like Gilbert. And it was that kind of character. I had to pop, and he did. I saw the first time I saw him was on Letterman. I think 80, 81.
Mm-hmm.
It was it was his first time on Letterman too. I think he hadn't been on Saturday Night Live yet, and he was just demented. I laughed so hard I woke up half the apartment building. It really was it was comedy about comedy. It was kind of a meta act, and he just was.
Yeah.
And it was perfect timing. He did get really sick though, right after.
I didn't know that.
He had appendicitis, and then that poisoned a lot of the system, and he was sick for months. Peritonitis is the
Yeah.
But he was, and he would call me from the hospital. He was in the hospital for a long time, and we would talk. And he was not sure he was going to be on the village.
Yeah.
He came through, and he finished, and he was great. And the ad libs, just the ad lib where he says, "We got to pack the guns and the knives." And they're trying. It's time to go because they found out And he's up in his cage throwing stuff in his suitcase. We got to pack the guns and the knives. And how about this picture? I think I'm making a weird face. And apparently Robin Williams saw that in that screening and just fell out of his chair laughing. And it was an ad lib. Even Robin couldn't top. And it almost got cut out of the picture because they were going. You have to get brutal.
Yeah.
It has to be a certain runtime. You're not getting any money for another minute. So somebody had edited, not the directors, but somebody had edited that scene, and they told me they had to cut it down. Oh my God! Show me the cut. Unfortunately, my office was right next door.
Right.
So I went, and I think Mark Hester or H. Lee Peterson was in there. I said, "Can I see this scene with the?" And they showed it to me, and I said, "How long does it have to be?" It has to be 13 seconds. Give me the dialogue, I'll recut it. And the thing was, from my perspective, what they'd left in was everything that was just exposition and obvious, and they cut out all the comedy. So I said, let's leave in the comedy and leave out all the text. And we did, and it worked, and I had so much fun animating.
Yeah.
Just a long. It was the cartooniest we were allowed to be in that era. And it was certainly an era of eras for animators in the generation. But, I kept on thinking, they had to sort of, Beauty and the Beast was going under budget, and one of the other pictures hadn't done so well. So they were starting to say, we still don't know whether we're going to make this a going concern. So during Aladdin, John and Ron sort of sold management on, if we do it cartoony, like Dumbo was the thing where they made it on budget because it was just so cartoony.
Right.
Now we did it sort of grudgingly. But even the early on things, they were like, they didn't want to do the genie design. They wanted it to look like a human being. There were people in management. No, it's got to look like a human in it because it has to be, and so there's very dull designs for the genie. But then Eric actually got to LA from where he'd been, and he knocked this. He took a Robin Williams clip from an album and just knocked it out of the park. Sensational. Just brilliant. And so we got to do that one cartoony, and I kept thinking, okay, now we can start making more cartoony films. And they got less cartoony after that. And, Pocahontas and all these epic stories that were almost like stage plays. And they're good pictures, but I kept hoping we'd make another cartoony one. And I guess we later did in the aughts, but it was a little more hit and miss. And it wasn't a trend that we could follow, even though it was a successful one.
Yeah. And then you went and did this here.
Supervising animator Will Finn was the team leader on Laverne.
Laverne the Gargoyle is sort of the wisdom speaker of the trio of gargoyles that we've given to Quasimodo as pals.
Quasi, take it from an old spectator. Life's not a spectator sport.
Wow. Yeah, I got to do story on that picture. And again, I was writing more than I was boarding. I don't think anything I boarded wound up in the movie. Brenda Chapman was doing a lot of board. So was Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart, who was just, he's like somebody right out of the original Mad Magazine crew. He draws a brilliant cartoon, Jack Davis style.
Right.
He was really probably did the most heavy lifting. And also Ed Goldberg, who I think wrote that. And Mary Wicks did the voice, and Mary was, but one of the things that I got very lucky with that run of characters, Grimsby and Hardsworth and Yago, was that when I was a kid growing up, old movies started popping up on TV, and my parents really loved the character actors. I think that rubbed off. They would always they knew all the character actors' names. So
right.
Watching a movie, it's oh, there's Mary Wicks. Oh, there's Jesse White. Oh, there's this character, Bert Lahr or Frank Morgan, and they would always call out their names, and I would just become okay. I got to see more of this person's work. And so they always say animators are actors with a pencil, but I saw myself more as a character actor. I was I never wanted to go Prince or Princess or any of that stuff. I didn't. obviously do those things. I wanted to like Mr. Smee is my favorite character in all of Disney.
Right.
Not necessarily my favorite movie, but I felt with all the concepts, perfect, perfect. And I was wanting to do that type character. I had to do those types in the movie, and that was incredibly gratifying. You wouldn't want me. Got very, very, 4 in a row. And I skipped Lion King. I talked my way off of that one, and, much to my regret. But after Hunchback, I got into directing, which was kind of a bit of a roller coaster. And I thought I was going to have a great career, and then I directed again.
I didn't hear you. He broke up a little bit.
I directed at DreamWorks for a while, and then I directed at Disney and came back in the aughts.
Okay.
It wasn't something they talk about innate talent, things like that. I don't think didn't work out. So I did wind up co-directing on another. I co-directed in all spaces, but I co-directed on an indie picture. I think that around 2015 or something. But it's not something that has been feature directing is really, really hard. And, people like Brad Bird and John Lasseter were smart because they set out to become directors, right? And you have to, not because there is so much to know. By the time I came to it, I knew a certain amount of story. I knew a certain amount of animating specific things, but I didn't really know how to do it.
Right.
I learned nothing. Actually, I think the things I learned in the times I was a co-director have helped me be a better story artist. I think, now when I'm doing a storyboard or even when I'm supervising other animators, I'm thinking, what is the director? And, you think entirely differently when you've been that person sitting in the editing room, looking at a sequence and thinking, okay, how many scenes is this going to take? Where are the cuts? How much process? How many characters are going to be on the screen?
Right.
Calculus you have to run to not get fired. I feel like those opportunities, even though I didn't wind up succeeding that much, I learned a lot from. Who knows? Maybe again.
Oh well, it's not too late. I mean, anything you working on right now or going into the new year?
Well, for the past 10 years, I got into, I wound up working 4 different times for Disney, 5 sort of unofficially, and then the last time I worked for them was I did a little bit of stopgap work for them in 2009, and then haven't been involved in anything since then. But then from that point on, I was working on a lot of indie pictures. Once as a co-director, a number of times as a story artist, sometimes as a consultant. But they were all indies, and they were all being made outside the studio system. And then but overlapping with that, I got involved with doing Tom and Jerry stuff for Warner Brothers TV.
Right.
Some friends of mine at Renegade Animation, Gerald Van Sitters and Ashley Costerway, they had gotten a contract to be the third-party studio. Renegade was going to do a new Tom and Jerry series for Cartoon Network, which I got involved in the design phase of it, freelance around 2011, and then I sort of didn't hear anything for a while. And then around 2012, 2013, the show was up and running, and they were giving me scripts to storyboard. And by 2016, I was doing that 2015, I was doing that full time. And the series had gotten renewed for a second season, and I did about 20 storyboards in the second season, and these were 6-minute cartoons for TV.
Right.
They play in the U.S. very much. They mostly played internationally. They did really well internationally, but for whatever reason, Tom and Jerry had a little bit less enthusiastic reception in the States. Literally everywhere. So obviously they keep them alive, and the show did very well. So much that they had been planning only to do 2 seasons, but they decided to do a third. And the writing team on the show had already moved on. They already had something else lined up. And because I've been rewriting a lot of stuff on my boards, the studio asked me to take over as the head writer for the show, and we wound up doing 3 more seasons. And I was boarding less at that point than just writing.
Right.
So I ended up having a hand in either writing or co-writing 250 cartoons for television since 2014. And then the show, we did 1 more season, technically a 6th season, but it was a new reboot of Tom and Jerry in New York City that was kind of there to create a parallel with the universe in the Tom and Jerry feature film that came out last year. And we got that on through HBO Now. I think it's still on. And then this summer, I'd sort of taken a break, and they said they were planning on doing a Tom and Jerry series for preschool. They now have something called Cartoonito, which is for the preschool set, and they wanted to use Tom and Jerry. Some really spectacular designs by Genevieve Tsai.
Right.
She did just on her own for Tom and Jerry and Nibbles and she did put them on Instagram. Sam Register, who's the charge of animation at Warner, he saw that and loved that, so we got this series. And so the person who was going to head it up had gotten lured away to Nickelodeon, and says, well, how about we'll take it. So I'll be supervising that show. I don't know what my title is. It's going to be animated overseas, so there'll be a director there doing like the day-to-day hands-on directing. But I'll be supervising. I'm already supervising the scripts and story. I did some editing of the character designs to get them prepped and ready for animation. And very excited about it. Tom and Jerry, if they weren't the very first cartoons I remember seeing, they're pretty darn close. Like I say, I remember seeing Heckle and Jekyll and Mighty Mouse and Woody Woodpecker and all this heavy rotation when I was a little kid. And Tom and Jerry were very prevalent. And they still hold up. People, when people talk about Tom and Jerry, we all know they're talking about the original cartoons that Bill and Joe made for theaters.
Right.
Oh, they're making Tom and Jerry again. Well, they never stopped making Tom and Jerry. Nothing has ever quite held a candle to those original theatrical cartoons. I mean, they were the most expensive cartoons ever made.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize this, but MGM, as a point of pride, wanted to outspend Disney. And Disney was spending less and less on their theatrical shorts at that, because they were pumping the big money into the feature films. So
right.
Even before Hanna-Barbera took over the division, MGM was making extremely elaborate short cartoons, and that standard continued into the Tom and Jerry era. And the money they spent on the Tom and Jerry, it's absolutely brilliant, because the budgets remained big until almost the very end. But Bill and Joe, I give them so much credit for knowing how to spend that money.
Right.
The cartoons, they look very simple. It's just a cat and a mouse in the living room running around. But boy, it's so well spent. They every background is perfectly painted so that it frames the action without any clutter. And, you have to do that's like 2 extra steps you have to add to your production. They got to shoot line tests and change them if they, at Warner they always said you shot it once and that was it. You might get a note to fix it, but you didn't see it again. Which is just breathtaking to me how precise those guys were.
Right.
And they had to be. So Tom and Jerry is an amazing property to work with. I'm very honored to work with Jay Bastian, who is one of the people in charge of the franchise over there. Has been a really great person to work with, and comes from having worked with Faith Hubley when he was a student, and he has a great sense of animation. And we have a lot of conversations about what does and doesn't work in Jerry. And obviously because we had about 20 writers submitting storylines when the show was going fulfilled, and not everybody can write a Tom and Jerry story. It's a hard thing to do, and I don't think I knocked it out of the park every single time, but there is something to it, and I managed to figure it out enough that I got to do it, and I'm still at it. So
right.
2022, getting this series on the air. It will be a preschool oriented series. There's already a variety. That's what I like to say. I usually don't talk much, least of all in social media, about what I'm doing because it's a conflict of interest to start taking your hand about what's going on.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, that's fine. I will say this. Anything to say about when the world kind of changed, when we kind of went from the 2D to the 3D era, when it was kind of changing? I mean, I grew up in the 2D era, so I still love 2D. So not the dumbed down Toy Story and the rest that are 3D, but
Well, the funny thing is, I've been hearing about that since I was a student. When I was an art student, all the art teachers I had, they're going to do all that with computers eventually. How do computers? I remember being in high school, being taken up to university, and the graphics department had managed to render a cube on screen.
Right.
Turn it in space. And it was like,
wow.
I don't get this. I'm not worried. I'm not scared. Well, I should have been. Obviously, the people that did get it, found it a Pixar. Years later, it just evolved, and it kept evolving. I thought there'd always be a place for 2D. I'm not so sure anymore. I think people are finding hybrid looks now that 2D is still sort of prevails in television because I think it's a little more fleet of foot, and TV is bottom. 2D is bottom heavy. You do more work in the middle and at the other end of the spectrum. In CG, you have to set so much up in advance, and then it's all limited to what's already there. At least that's how it's been. It might change. But yeah, and my kids, they grew up in the Pixar era. They prefer the Pixar pictures to the stuff I worked on, and they're not shy about letting me know it. And yeah, the things don't always go your way. The world changed when animation came roaring back in the late 80s. Unfortunately, I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. But there was a time when it looked like that wouldn't happen. And so when it did happen, it was very gratifying. And then it changed again, a decade or so later. And it just keeps changing. I think unlike our predecessors, whether we even if we tried to, we couldn't stop bringing new talent in because the demand for product is bigger than ever.
Right.
But what's changed is there isn't, it used to be a very small talent pool to draw from. So you were got the job. So it was a little bit more. There's only crazy people want to be animators. So they tried to talk me in a commercial arts school. They tried to talk me out of getting into animation. The cartoon teacher said, "Don't do it, kid. You're going to starve. Do a comic strip." That was everything. Everybody said, "Do a comic strip. Do Garfield. Do Peanuts." I never wanted to do that. I always wanted to be part of a crew and work with collaboration. I got lucky enough to do that and still do it, and that's very gratifying. But yeah, people, and then the thing was somebody even told me. I remember they said, "Yeah, that movie Disney did, Robin Hood, that's all computers." I kind of seen the guys drawing that. I don't think that's computers, but it did happen. I'm glad it happened. Nothing should stay the same forever. I'm okay with change.
Right.
And if things stand still for too, I think I might have said before that when we were in our glory days back in the early '90s, late '80s, I remember looking around the studio and at my colleagues and just thinking how lucky we were and what a great time we were having, and that it wouldn't last.
Right.
I guess not everybody thought this way, but I thought this isn't going to go on forever. One way or the other, it's going to change into something else. And it did for many of us, not for everybody, but for many of us it did. And, I'm glad I took the trouble to enjoy it while it was going on, because it was literally a dream come true. I hate to keep that maudlin, but it the night that we saw Beauty and the Beast finished and just reacting to it so well and seeing it with an audience of critics who just were, doing cartwheels, and then getting the book with my interview in it, and taking my picture. It was 30 years after I'd sat on the chair with my sister seeing Bill Powell's picture at Disney Studio, and then it was 30 years later I opened a book and there was my picture with the animators of Beauty and the Beast, and I was the guy now. I mean, it literally does. It literally, when dream fulfillment happens in that level of detail,
right,
it just doesn't get any better. And I'm very lucky and very grateful for all that.
Yeah, like I've told a lot of people who I've talked to, I think I said it earlier too. The work you guys did, it's just, who knew it was going to take off? Disney, it changed a lot when Walt died, and Ron Miller was running the company, and then came Michael and Jeffrey, and you guys from Kyle Arts and other places came aboard, and then from Great Mouse Detective, Roger Rabbit, Oliver, Mermaid, Rescuers Down Under. I know that movie didn't do well financially, but I love Rescuers anyway. But
it's a good movie.
Yeah.
It ran against Home Alone, which was a juggernaut. Also, they packaged it together with a short of Mickey's Prince of the Pauper, which is very good.
Right.
Very good. But they put a 15-minute intermission in between them to make it run a full program time, because Mickey wasn't quite long enough, and Rescuers Down Under isn't exactly feature length either. So to pad it out, they put a 15-minute clock on the screen. Not that I don't like clocks, but playing Disney music that showed "Be Back" in 15 minutes, and people got up and went into the other theater to watch Home Alone. I mean, it was like an invitation to bail on the movie, and I think that did a lot to hurt that picture.
Right.
And I had fun in that movie. Actually, it was the first time I didn't get, I got to do Lord Grimsby and Little Mermaid. I had a hand in helping Sebastian design, and Duncan Marchbanks, who was the lead animator on the character, gave me a lot of nice things to do. But I didn't get a lead character in Rescuers Down Under. I was a little bummed out about that. But it gave me the incentive. I at that point, it was like the pressure wasn't on. So
right.
I did get to do. I just had fun on. And I realized when the picture was over, it was the first time I could sit through a film I'd worked on and not cringe every time when my scenes came up. And at that point, I'd been in the business for 10 years, and I was getting the confidence and experience under my belt, and yet didn't have the pressure of being on a featured character. And that combination was liberating, and it kind of teed me up well to be Cogsworth in the movie. But yeah, it's a good picture. There's a lot of amazing stuff. Glenn Keane's stuff is just amazing.
Yeah.
Everybody did nice work. And, it wasn't, everybody's first choice to make a sequel out of Rescuers, but that's what came down from management.
Right. And who knew, Beauty and the Beast, when that came out, like how big that movie was going to become, Golden Globe, Oscar, and
I did.
Yeah.
I'd seen the John Cocteau movie, the French film of it, in black and white, and I'd seen that years ago, in my early 20s with some friends, and I just fell in love with it. I thought it was like, God, this is, it's a story I don't really care about, but the film was so good, it was magical, and I thought, why would you remake a jewel? French, and not everyone speaks French, and it's not a cartoon, and it's not a musical. You know, and obviously it went through a sort of tortured change of directors, which people do. And Kirk and Gary are the only directors that would have given me that chance at that time to get a character. It was just, you know, to my undying gratitude. I didn't even see it at first. I thought, okay, the objects are enchanted. And, oh boy, what is there? A talking aspirin bottle? And, everything talks and dances around. But they showed me the design, and I thought, you know, it had potential. And then David's voice was so, you know, evocative that I had to do it.
Yeah. Anything to add about when you was working with Jeffrey? I don't know if you worked with Michael, but I know they was there.
Jeffrey was hands-on, man. He, you know, and the thing was, he and Michael didn't really understand the animation division. They wanted it all a lot. I think Michael really just wanted to do TV because that was in his background. He'd been in charge of children's programming for Saturday morning TV at ABC. That was his first big gig for Billy Diller.
Right.
And, I think that's all he wanted to do. But, you know, Roy sort of, you know, stood in the way and said, no, you're not going to. The other person who saved the industry, I can't say this enough, and I know I'm not the only person who says this, but I privately have said this for a long time. Steven Spielberg saved.
Yeah.
And, you know, I like Steven Spielberg films. I've met him a couple times when I was working at DreamWorks. He's obviously a genius. But him putting his muscle into American Tail, and you know the case that they were building. If you read interviews with Michael Eisner at the time, was animation costs a lot of money to do theatrically, and it doesn't make any. But Cauldron Tank, Great Mouse Detective Tank, they felt like they had the case. Somebody I remember even pointed out right around the time I was coming back in '87. Somebody pointed out that, well, they just re-released Cinderella theatrically, and it did great. And, you know, I was trying to that. Well, yeah, but we had to market it and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but it's free money. It really paid. You know, but they were building the case. And I think the success of American Tail was at least one of the things that shamed them into keeping the animation division open and making Oliver. And then Oliver Company, you know, the tar out of the next Spielberg.
Right.
Which I couldn't believe. I thought dinosaurs would just beat us a lot.
What?
And I thought they'd kill us. But Oliver was, you know, fun, upbeat movie, and Disney was back. And I was like, okay, we're going to make one of these a year now. We're going into hyperdrive. It was like, oh my God, how would we do this? And yeah, and then at that point, Jeffrey really got rich. And he read up on Disney, and he saw all the movies, and he studied them.
Right.
And he was a really good catalyst to have during that era, because a lot of us, you know, we were only in our 20s and 30s, but we were still thinking like the old men we were meant admired, and everything was sort of nostalgic. And not everything, but there was sort of a nostalgic bent to the mentality, and he would just slap you silly out of that, you know, and just say, nobody's going to compare Ariel to Princess Aurora. They're going to compare her to Julia Roberts, Prince to Tom Cruise. Wake up, you know. It's like, you know, I remember being in some of those meetings saying, well, you have a point. You know, and Howard Ashman, of course, the other one, just Howard and Ellen Menken, you know, it's just this, you know, we could do 2 hours on just the timing of how that affected too.
Yeah.
There were things that could have gone very, very wrong without a sensibility like Howard's. Because Howard, you know, they always say he's a Broadway guy. He wasn't a Broadway guy. He was an off-Broadway guy. He was
right.
An establishment guy. Little Shop was decidedly off-Broadway. But he loved, he understood better than anybody since Walt Disney, I think. Howard understood the difference between a stage musical, a movie musical, and a Disney cartoon movie musical.
Right.
You know, Ellen, in particular, very, very has a very, very fixed sense of how musicals work, and it's all oriented to the stage. And there's actually texts on her stage musicals work.
Right.
Role it's like the Bible of that, and Ellen is very much a champion of that. Howard didn't care about that stuff. He was much more intuitive. He was much more like Walt Disney in stringing together how a musical can work in a cartoon. And it's not the same way they work in movies and stage, live action movies and stage. It's a much more intuitive thing, and it's not like God, I probably should tell all these stories, but I remember on Hunchback we had a problem because we didn't have any songs in the third act. Actually, we didn't have any songs in the second act. The movies to about halfway through the second act, and then no songs.
Right.
That's how we resolved that. I remember singing, sitting one evening in a meeting with Eisner, and he says, "I've never heard of a musical that had songs through one half,
Right.
songs through the second half." And I raised my hand and said, "Pinocchio." Yes. But that didn't go. Michael didn't care about Pinocchio. That wasn't the Sound of Music is the movie musical, which is kind of the way I think he just sort of looked at it. But fortunately, Jeffrey had a much more open approach to it. Howard was putting Steven Spielberg's just incentive in finishing Roger Rabbit, getting it done through the studio and with the studio. Then right when they're saying, "Oh, animation doesn't make any money," American Tail comes out and beats every box office record ever. And so it's like, well, maybe Disney can't make money. And you have to know, you have to think that just like incentivized, the company is like, whether they liked it or not,
right,
in the game, because they can't lose a franchise, they can't lose a medium they built to another studio. It's gonna be embarrassing. So that's how I always looked at that.
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting how, like, because I know when that came out, they just did The Great Mouse Detective.
Yeah.
And just, I remember watching Waking Sleeping Beauty, and they was talking about that, and it was like, so this movie about the young boy who trying to find his father, his parents, that movie outbeat this detective-like film that was originally Basil of Baker Street, then changed to The Great Mouse Detective. That's interesting, even though I like Great Mouse Detective and American Tail, but that was really interesting.
Yeah,
but I know
I get to work on Great Mouse Detective, and Great Mouse and Roger Rabbit are the two movies I didn't work on that I wish I had. Everything else, whether I like it or not, I can live with. But those are the two credits I wish I had. John Musker said, "Tell people you worked on Great Mouse; they won't notice."
And he's right.
Movie, so I got his blessing to lie about it, but I won't. I love the movie. I thought it was great, and it suffered a lot of difficulty in production, but Glenn's approach to the Radigan character and Vincent Price's voice and all the characters, Rob Minkoff's animation on Basil, and my kids watched that one. They won't watch any of the ones I worked on. When they were little, they would watch Great Mouse Detective. But the other thing that hurt it was right around then, Spielberg had flopped with Young Sherlock Holmes. So there was sort of a handwriting on the wall that Sherlock Holmes was box office poison.
Right. But I guess Mouse Detective was a good start because I know that Black Cauldron didn't do well. So when they did Mouse Detective, it was a good stepping start to where Ron and John and everybody else was going to where it was going to go. Yeah.
There was still a lot of old school thinking in Black Cauldron, and Black Cauldron was sort of sabotaged by prestige. One of the things I've learned is that sometimes you're better off working on something that is a little bit under the radar. It doesn't have all the prestige, because when you're dealing with prestige, there's so much pressure. Everyone in the kitchen gets involved and wants to have something to say, and it can really make life difficult for everybody and not result in the best movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that kind of there's a lot of good stuff in it. Phil Niblick did a lot of great animation. Andreas did some nice stuff. Who else? Sean Keller. Barry Temple did a lot of the stuff of that little gremlin character. Reaper. I never actually saw the picture.
Ooh.
Yeah, I never read this.
So, is there any plans to do like a doc about your life or a movie? I mean, who's going to play Will Finn? You know.
So somebody said Michael Moore. Somebody said I look like Michael Moore.
Wow.
Michael Moore is like, geez, regardless of what you think about Michael Moore, being compared to him physically is not a compliment. Now, sometimes I've thought about writing all of this down while I still remember it. The thing is, they do make documentaries, and I don't watch them. I really don't want to see somebody else. Don Hahn, who I love, has done a couple documentaries that some other people have, and I don't want to see them. I remember it the way I remember it, and according to me, that's right. And I don't
Right.
know anybody else's interpretation of it, which is one of the other things. I don't really watch a whole lot of animation anymore. So yeah, I thought about putting some of this down because I lived through an interesting time, but as more time goes by, it seems more and more superfluous. It doesn't seem. I don't know how much relevance it has to people getting into the business now because they're getting in a completely different business. It's nothing like it was for us.
Right.
So I don't know how much I could offer other than for people that enjoy reading anecdotes about specific people and behind the scenes stuff, which is fun. I don't put a big price tag on animation history. I always think the pictures speak for themselves, and they don't need a whole lot of excavation to understand how or why they were made. Actually, the less you know about that, sometimes the more enjoyable the pictures are. I think particularly around Looney Tunes, so much legendary mythology built up around the different directors and very, very hard for some people to just watch them again like they're cartoons and not be burdened by, Chuck has this interpretation.
Right.
This feeling, have this approach, and the Princes of Final Cut. It's just like, just watch them, they're good, enjoy them.
Well, I know a lot of people would like to like what I'm going to tell you right now is that again, thank you for what you've done on all the Disney films and prior and what have you over the years. I mean, it's touched a lot of people's from the 80s, 90s like me, and into the 2000s. I mean, what you guys done is just it touched and moved. This guy.
I'm happy to see how unmodeled that
is. I gotta tell you, he just something popular about Cosworth. He for somebody who was working for the Beast, and then it just kind of be like, no, he can't, no. But then Lemire, he was like the outspoken one, and then they did the whole Be Our Guest number, and he finally was getting into it.
I didn't realize that until after the movie was done, but that you can do the movie without Cogsworth because he's in there to be a foil. He's in there to be the sand in the gears, because Lumiere and Mrs. Potts want everything to go well.
Right.
Cogsworth doesn't want it to not. He doesn't want it to not go well, but he's terrified of upsetting the status quo. So he sort of is, this aspect of authority that's trying to slow down a process that needs to proceed. So he's really just there as a comic foil. I never really understood what that term meant until I did the character. And I also realized very quickly, children didn't like him because he's like an authority figure. He's like the principal. He's like the heavy. Adults find him funny periodically because because it's a comic character. He's a stuffed shirt. But yeah, it was. I always said that if you asked me what the movie was about, I'd tell you Beauty and the Beast is a movie about a clock who lives in a castle and trying to stop a candlestick and a teapot from letting the piece get out of control. But yeah, it was wonderful to do it, and it was the right instinct. I think the instinct for the characters and their personalities came initially from Howard, then Gary and Kirk and Don and the story people all built on that. And all I had to do was not screw it up. And, It's one of the few things I can look back in my life when
Oh man.
Well, I didn't screw that up too badly. Yeah, that and it is nice to know that people still look at those pictures and there was a time when I think we thought these movies were immortal. I don't think they are. I don't think they're everlasting, but they do last, and that they've lasted as long as they have, 30 years on, is kind of amazing and something to be grateful for somebody like me.
Right.
I don't know if they'll go on forever. There was a sense, definitely, in the nostalgia for movies when I was growing up, is that the classic movies would go on and on forever. But it's a lot of classic stuff you can talk about now that I grew up with that nobody's ever seen.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned the Marx Brothers.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
I got one last thing I'm gonna show you before I let you go. It's a trailer for one movie that you did in the '80s, and I think you did do this one. I got a trailer for it.
You look a lot like a puppet I saw once. Name was Pistachio.
That's Pinocchio.
It's all new. All wonderful. All Pinocchio.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Filmation's Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night.
I'm a real live boy again.
Coming this Christmas. And that's no lie. Rated G.
You're trying to kill me. So yeah, that was 18 months at Filmation working. Boy, that's a whole story.
Yeah.
If you ever want to mark out another 2 or 3 hours, I could talk about that. Yeah.
Oh man.
I'd been fired at Disney, so I was kind of persona non grata after 1970. I was at Bluth for 5 years, and then for a few years I freelanced around town, and then I did work at Filmation for 18 months when they got their feature division, which was just so strange. And I don't think that picture ever got released officially. Such limited release. But yeah, their notion of Filmation was to do things like sequels to BD stuff that coincidentally had originally we were on this Pinocchio thing. I will say none of my stuff was in that trailer, but I will say the director let me do some real full animation. And because, Bluth had a very specific approach to animation, so I was always trying to please him. But I really got to sort of cut loose into the occasional scene where I would learn something that I didn't know how to do. And so a lot of it was hit and miss. But I got to do a lot of stuff with that raccoon character you saw at the end. They're heavy. And he was fun to draw. And I think there was something else. Oh no, there was another. They made a Snow White sequel with the dwarf sisters, and I did the first really good dialogue close up. I did on that.
Right.
Lord of the Dwarf Elves. And I flipped it recently, and I thought, yeah, that's still. But it was a breakthrough. It was at that point in my career was like at that point it was about 6-7 years in.
Mm-hmm.
Just like occasionally I'd have a breakthrough, and then it would be months or years before something. So
right.
Yeah, Filmation, boy, crazy. I worked a little bit on the last He-Man shows with He-Man and She-Ra, and then I managed to get on the feature film division with other animators from my generation who I won't name because they probably don't want to be remembered for it. But we had some fun, and it was a good crew. And a lot of those people, the young people that were some of the old guard Filmation obviously in charge, but some of the younger people on the show wound up at Disney.
Yeah.
So it was
I gotta try to find it. I've never seen that before, and I was like, I wonder if I've never seen it before.
I think I did see it finished. I think they screened it for us at some theater one Saturday morning, and we all slipped out to Sherman Oaks or somewhere.
Right.
And I remember we didn't see dailies. We would see our pencil tests on video, and people were complimentary. There's people doing some nice stuff, really trying, but it was a lost art, and it's much easier to learn now but when I was young, there were so many people. You just struggled with it. You didn't have video. You didn't have anything to rely on to study. So it was a real struggle. I think people can animate faster now because it just didn't die out like it nearly did for us. But
Right.
yes, we'll see the stuff. But then they decide, okay, we'll show you the finished footage. They set up a projector in the back. Now we each slept back into it. It was a warehouse, basically, what it was. And we'd go back there. And they stopped doing it because morale plummeted when they saw the finished footage. It's like,
Oh my gosh.
my goodness, is this what this thing looks like?
Mm.
Yeah,
Wow.
I don't want to end on a sour note because so many things I could say. Filmation was, if nothing else, almost everybody in my generation wound up, unless they had, never-ending good graces at Disney. Sooner or later, everybody wound up.
Right.
For Sting. Or Hanna-Barbera, which I never worked with Hanna-Barbera, ironically. I would have loved to. But, they paid the rent for almost 2 years,
Yeah.
Then when I was done there, I was able to pick up a Disney.
And what kind of music does Will Finn listen to?
I don't really, we're having conversations on how to handle the music in this new Tom and Jerry show, and I've kept my comments out of it because I'm not up to speed with contemporary music. I really, when I listen to music, I get lost in it, so I don't work to music because it'll distract me too much.
Okay.
So I used to have a long commute. Now I work at home, so I used to listen to music in the car. So one of the standbys for me is I fell in love with the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, which I hated as a little kid. My grandfather played them, but I listened to those. I still listen to them. I was a K-pop addict for a while, up until about 5 years ago. But around 2010, I went K-pop crazy. That's
right.
Indefinitely. It isn't a big thing with me. I don't take music seriously. My younger brother actually has a degree in music, play, instruments, and a very sophisticated taste in music. And he's like very good opera. To me, music is something for older people. I'm really kind of surprised how rarely I listen to it.
Right. Well, like I say, man, thanks again for talking with me today. I appreciate you taking the time out. Like I said, I've had, Don Hahn. I just had George Scribner last week, and many others from over the years at Disney. And talking with you guys, that's something I can put into my, my list of accomplishments that I appreciated. Growing up watching the making of films and seeing you guys on there is like I've never thought years later I have a podcast and I talk with a lot of people that I've worked with. Don, Gary, I've had on, and Nick Ranieri, Dave Prusma. You seen that? I've had a lot of people on here, and having you come aboard too. It made my day, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always amazed at how long I can run my mouth and not really get enough out. Just opening up that whole suitcase of Filmation just now, again, it was only a couple years, but boy, what a vivid time. And it represents, Filmation as a studio represents something of an era that's kind of gone, that for better or worse, that that's kind of how animation was in the 70s, and it represents something, and I gotta say, some of the memories of that make me smile.
Well, that's something we're going to bring up next time I talk to you. About that, because like I said, when I saw that trailer, I was like, I think Will Finn worked on that movie, but I saw your face light up when the trailer played. So yeah, that's
yeah. Like I say, paid the rent.
Yeah.
And I got to animate. I had a pretty free hand with what I got to do. There was no consistency from one scene to the next, but the director ultimately liked me and inspired a little bit. But he liked me and
Oh man. Well, Will, thanks again for coming and talking to me today. You have a safe Christmas and New Year. And if you have time, maybe in the spring of next year, I'll reach out to you and we'll do another interview.
Okay, I look forward to it. Thank you, Matt.
No problem. Have a good one, man.
Good.
Well, guys, thanks again for tuning in and watching another day with Slick, a better you, Matt. And one thing I say at the end of my shows, always good to help better advance yourself to help advance others. And hearing what you heard today was a big inspiration. And I always enjoy talking with animators and anybody from my childhood growing up. So again, thanks again. And you guys have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and be safe. God bless.